Well, all right. We are back again for another Other Ink Thursday, and this time I'm talking to Robert Turk of Wicked Clever Games. Hey, Robert.
Hey, Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty great, pretty great. Always great to talk to you. A true friend in gaming. Even though we have only been in the same place at the same time, like for like maybe 10 minutes total in our time of knowing each other,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
I consider you one of my gaming friends.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we see each other online,
Right,
like
but
in Discords and play tests but yes,
absolutely.
face to face. We have never gone out to dinner together.
That is
That's
true. That is
that's the
true.
thing. That's the
Well,
thing.
Origins is coming up,
It
so put it
is.
on the calendar.
Yes.
I'll put it, we usually have blocked out, like, because unless you plan
Right.
to do it, it is too busy at a convention to do it. Well, you're
Right.
usually playing game. I mean, we're just jumping all over we haven't even done an,
Yep.
like, what, but like, you're usually playing a lot of games. So let's do into that. Like, you go to cons to play your games.
To
And
run my games. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. To play your games with other people to, I
Right.
guess, get the word out, but like presumably you have fun doing it or you wouldn't do it.
Yes, I do have fun doing it. I have had to cut back on the hours that I run at conventions. No longer can I run 3 games a day every day for
Hmm,
a convention. It's way too much.
that's
So
that's intense.
yeah.
That's
So
intense.
I think Origins last year I did 16 hours. So that would have been 4 games. I might have squeezed a fifth one in there. Um, but I think it was 4 games. So and that's kind of what I'm shooting for this year. But I'm gonna run them through indie games on demand.
All right. So you get like the people sit down at the table and they're like, would you like to play my Haunted Starship game or would you like to play Goblins doing dumb stuff game? And people are going to be
Yes.
like the table that's how games on demand work, right? Like
Yep.
you and the table is like, I don't know, we're feeling like dumb goblins. And they're like, great,
Right.
dumb goblins. Here's the book, here's the game. Like do you want to I've summarized it. Have I are there any details to add? Like that's
A
game.
dumb goblin's not in space yet. Not in space yet.
Oh man.
Um,
Oh man.
so yeah,
The
we're jumping
next
all over the place.
we are. I told you I had no question list
That's
coming
that's
into this.
okay. That's all right.
I'm
Um,
definitely here for the sci-fi expansion to Goblonia.
yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Okay, excellent, excellent.
I'll start with
So
hi, I'm Robert Turk. I make role-playing games.
make role-playing
That's
games.
that's probably kind of a given, right? On your
Uh
channel.
yeah, so you'll be excited about this. I am in trying to talk to Kaylin from the production side. She's our
Yeah.
rep for Jostens, the printing company that both of us use.
Yep.
So I've reached out to her and I'm like, hey, do you want to be on an interview talking about like all of this industry stuff from your side?
Yeah.
And she said yes. So that'll be cool. But yeah, mostly I talk to like other creators, publishers, that kind of stuff,
That
artists
would
sometimes.
I want to watch that interview with
Yeah.
Kaylin because I have been working with Kaylin since 2017 and I still have questions. Like there's still stuff I don't know about making books that I'll email her and I'm like, this seems like a complicated question to me. And she's like, oh no, we get that all the time. That's easy. Here's the answer. Okay, great. So yeah,
Yeah, I think when it comes time to do the interview, I'm going to put out a call for questions from like people that I know so that uh that she could do it. But here we are once again. We haven't even started this interview. We're talking about a theoretical future interview. I somehow I knew this is how this would go. And I'm here for it. But Robert, you make role-playing games now,
I
but you
do.
didn't always make role-playing games, but you've kind of always been like the I don't know, broadly speaking, you're the like artsy person. Is that accurate or is it
No, that's pretty accurate. I am a theater person at
theater? That's
heart.
the other thing. Theater kid is you have
Yeah,
real theater kid energy sometimes.
but more the technical theater side.
Hmm.
Like I really wanted to be an actor when I went to college for theater and and couldn't cut it as an actor at the college level, which probably means no, I wasn't gonna cut it at the professional level either.
Sure, sure.
So I got into stage management, which was my first career. theatrical stage management. I got into sound design by necessity. That's how I met my wife, who is a fabulous costume designer and now an art educator and professor of costume design. Um,
Nice.
so yeah, I mean, my first career was theatrical stage management, and I loved it. And we played role-playing games with the tech staff like on our days off, um, which were few and far between. But we would play Dungeons and Dragons. We would play. There was a Warhammer role-playing game, not like 40K with the miniatures and stuff, but there was actually a
Yeah.
Warhammer role-playing game set in the fantasy Warhammer world. We played that. We played some GURPS. Um, I'm really dating myself now. But
It
yeah,
happens. It
so
happens.
yeah, and even back then, I recently found a copy of a game that I started writing
Mm,
way back then. And it was, I wanted to capture that spirit of the Discworld novels. Kind
mm.
of, it was sort of this uh, almost absurdist fantasy, but not quite, and medieval. And I'm glad I never went anywhere with it because it's pretty bad looking back where I am now. But yeah, I mean, I started in theater, and then we moved around for Rebecca's career, my wife's career, and we moved out to Oregon because she got a job in at a university, and I was like, oh, I'm a sound designer too. I've always wanted to break into movies. I can commute to LA. You cannot commute to LA from Oregon.
From Oregon, there's a lot of California in between
It's,
those two places.
it's a really long, yeah.
That's
So
I mean, you're in Ohio and I'm in Kentucky, but there's more I would guess that there's more California between LA and Oregon than there is between where you and I are right now.
I
It's
think it was going to be a 14-hour drive
Oh
from
yeah,
where we
that's
lived in
way
Oregon. It's
more, way more.
basically driving
Yeah,
from the top of the country to the bottom of the
yeah,
country or
yeah.
something. Which doesn't look that huge on a map, but in a
Right.
car, that's a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
When the map is only 2 inches by
right.
4 inches or whatever, you're like, oh, it's just right over there. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, so okay, so you're like, okay, no, no LA. So what then what? Then what?
This is good. I was gonna tell the short version. I'm telling the long version, and it turns
Well,
out.
you could
No,
speed it
no,
up.
I'll speed it up. I'll speed it up. So we discovered this group. So we were living in Oregon, which is kind of artsy hippie, like the whole state is kind of artsy hippie fun. We discovered this group called Fairy Worlds that was putting on fairy festivals. We went to see what it was all about because one of my favorite artists, Brian and Wendy Froud, were going to
Oh
be
yeah.
there doing their thing. And they do fairy art. Actually, Wendy Froud does puppetry, and she designed Yoda, and she's amazing. They're wonderful, nice people. But that was our chance to meet them and sort of see what all this was about. And we sort of fell in love with that scene and that community,
Yeah.
um, and decided if we were going to
Like
come
a,
back,
a theater person, sound designer, and a costume design professor.
right.
Like, why wouldn't you love Fairy Festival?
Right, right. Yeah. So it kind of fit everything. And then we started a business actually making sculpted leather carnival masks, sculpted leather corsets, and selling them at the Fairy Festival. And that actually lasted. Rebecca got a job back in Ohio, so we moved to Ohio. That kept us going until I don't remember what year it was. It was that first real stock market crash of our lives. Um,
Oh, uh,
yeah,
2008 is the
yeah,
housing bubble
so it was
crash
right
into
before
2009.
that. Yeah, right before all that. When we were at a convention in Philly, and CNN saying, "Cut up your credit cards, don't spend any money." And we're like, "Oh, we might need to make a transition from these high-end leather costume accessories." Um, we started making stuffed animals instead. We made stuffed
I,
goblin dolls for many years.
all
Yeah.
right. I didn't know
Um,
about this step.
no,
I've heard about leather masks before, but
yep.
stuffed goblin dolls.
Stuffed goblin dolls, and we sold them at Renaissance festivals and
Yeah.
East Coast Fairy festivals and West Coast Fairy festivals. And then my wife went back to school to get her master's degree. So she was working, running costume shops and designing costumes. She went back to get her master's degree. I was on the road going to all these festivals by myself, and I got bored. As I think is kind of a through line through my life. As a theater person, I'm always looking for what's the next project, right? If I
Mhm.
sit on something too long, I get bored with it.
Mm.
So it's always what's the next thing that we're going to do. I was out there selling the stuffed animals by myself. I was bored. Um, and so together, Rebecca and I invented a character, Gandersnitch the Goblin, and I started performing as Gandersnitch the Goblin at festivals, transitioned him to indoor conventions as well. And he was a steampunk goblin, like full prosthetics, full makeup. I had found my performance calling. Um,
At
and
last, as a
at last,
goblin.
yeah, and loved doing it, and was telling stories. And a friend said, well, you need to write these stories down. And I'm like, no, that's not what I do. I just tell them, right? It's a different art between writing
Sure.
and storytelling. And they're like, no, no, you really need to write it down. There's this new thing at the time called Kickstarter.
Uh-huh.
um, and we just used it to take our show to the Fringe Festival in Ireland. You should do it so you could publish these as a book. And I'm like, I don't know the first thing about any of that. But if there's money there and you all help me make it happen, sure. Um, and they did. And so I published a couple traditional books of short stories, fiction about Gandersnitch the Goblin. And it just so happened that in one of those books, I have Gandersnitch and his friends sitting around a table in a pub playing a card game called Hog Swallow. And it was basically the Goblins version of poker. It was all story based. Um, and people started asking me where I found that game, where to buy that game. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I'm an author. I make stuff up.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
like all this is imaginary. This is all pretend,
That's
people.
right.
Um, and after probably about 2 years of people wanting that game, I realized, well, maybe we should just make that game, right? So that when people say, hey, I like this book, how do I get the card game that was in it? Oh, it's right here,
Right here
right?
in this
Yeah,
box.
in this box. It came in a bag, actually.
Okay.
It was nice. We hand stamped and hand dyed these
Oh
cloth
yeah.
bags, and
Were you still
yeah.
making animals? Was this so the books were like a sideline to the stuffed animals at this
Mm.
time, or had the
Um,
performance already replaced the stuffed
the
toys?
performance actually did end up replacing the stuffed animals. So it was too much to keep that business going. That business had grown to a point where we needed to outsource pretty
Hmm.
much everything to meet demand. Um, and we attempted to do that and keep it in the United States, which for us was the right ethical move to make. Um, and for the business, it was the wrong financial move to make.
Yeah.
So we ended up tanking, and
Yeah.
we had to close that business down. And it was okay because our kids were growing up, and once we finally stopped and looked at how much time we were spending all week long making stuffed animals by hand, sitting on the couch watching Netflix, stuffing the stuffing in the arms and the fingers
Yeah.
and everything. And then we weren't doing anything else.
Yeah.
So much so that my firstborn child went to a festival with us. They were probably between 4 and 6. Um, and we had all the goblins on a table. It was Ohio Renaissance Fest. We had all the goblins on a table, and people were coming up and buying. And my kid starts getting very upset
Mm.
because these are mommy and daddy's goblins that they just spent weeks making, and now people are taking them.
Uh-huh.
And my kid made the connection of, oh no, they're gonna have to make more. So all those things kind of fell into place, and we're like, yeah, yeah. But I had the other thing. I mean, I had the
Right,
performance.
right. You're
The book had just come out. The first book had just come out when we decided to close the stuffed animal business. And the game came out shortly thereafter, I think.
cool.
Um,
Is Hog Swallow still available, or then like
I keep
I mean
meaning to I keep meaning to put it on Drive-Thru RPG so people
Mm.
can download it. Um, the
But yeah, I
prop,
mean, you're not really hand
mm-mm,
stamping cards
mm-mm,
anymore. You're
no,
you're yet another iteration. So um
right.
I mean I don't want to accelerate your story too
No,
much, but
we're
like
jumping.
there's
It's your show.
the next
I like I told you, I'll just keep talking.
yeah. But like the next thing, okay, so you've gone through this like sort of series of overlapping circles, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
moving just a little bit further, adding something, dropping something, adding something, dropping something. So you're at books, and then and you've made a game now, but it's like a card game in a bag, and it's got cards. So what was the first like what's one step more that brought you into like making
Oh,
tabletop
absolutely.
games?
Making tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah.
So I had a Tuesday night gaming group, which I called the middle-aged men gaming group. And I had found that group through the Renaissance Festival. Like our neighbor at the Renaissance Festival had a game store at the Renaissance Festival.
Mhm.
He's like, you should come play. We don't play Dungeons and Dragons though. We play a game called Savage Worlds, and I had never heard of Savage Worlds at that point. And I was like, okay, I'll come try it out. And I think we were playing some sort of X-Files FBI agent kind of thing. And I hated it, but I had a lot of fun. Like I had there were 6 of us in the group, and it was nice on Tuesday nights to get together with people of the same age. It was all guys, and just kind of hang out and do something that wasn't
Mhm.
work, right? Um, and I had Hog Swallow at the time. I made a silly little role playing game to run as Ganesh the Goblin at a convention called Con on the Cob, because I was asked to come run games at Con on the Cob. And I started with, well, how would Gandersnitz run Dungeons and Dragons? And I realized he would misinterpret everything, which would upset players. Like if you're coming to a Dungeons and Dragons game and the person running it says we're throwing the rule book out the window, it's bait and switch. It's not probably what you signed up for, unless you knew the character of Gandalf the Goblin. Then it's like, let's see how
Yeah,
he messes this up,
if you're
right?
gonna play D&D with a goblin, if that's like in the title, like I don't know that you're throwing the book out too hard there. But yeah, I can see that there I can imagine some upset players, but
Yeah. So I made a silly little game that you used all the dice you happen to own, all of them, every single dice you happen to own to play the game, and 2 decks of playing cards. You'd flip over a card, and that would tell you what you had to do with the dice. And if you failed, you draw a card, and that was the bad thing that happened. And again, we're playing on post-it notes and index cards and business cards that have been printed on, right? It's like not even quite a prototype, and people are starting to ask, where do I get this game? Where do I get this game? I'm like, you
mhm.
don't. It's a convention game. You don't. This is a bit for me. This
Right,
is
it's
not
a bit.
a um after about a year of that, I was like, wait a second, people are not asking me where to get it. They're telling me to make it.
Mm,
And so I did make it. And so I had that game out, which is no longer in print, and I'm specifically not saying the name because it still happens at conventions. Actually, it has a really large convention following at Gary Con and some other places, but I don't run it anymore. My dear friend Nancy runs it and has added to it, and she's added to it so much that probably at this point it's mostly
right,
her game that she's running.
right.
And you can't get it. It's not in print. You can find it on Drive-Thru RPG under our website if you wanted to. But at that point, playing with this Tuesday night group, there was a contest that came up called the 200 word role playing game contest.
Yeah, 200 word
Um,
RPG challenge.
yes, yes. And I was like, ooh, that's interesting. I want to try and do that. Um, and so I
I love
did.
the 200 word RPG challenge.
Yeah,
It's so like I mean, it's easy. I don't know, because I've made a few games. It's easy to make a game in only 200 words. I mean, but it may not be a good game. But when you
right.
find a good game that is contained within 200 words, those ones are amazing.
Yep. Yep. So that's what it was like. Like I had 2 games out that were mostly card games. Like, and I was like, what am I doing? I know how to make a book. Um,
Hmm.
so I was thinking at that point about, well, maybe I'll write the Gandersnitch the Goblin role-playing game. That maybe that's really what I want to do. Like Gannisnitch has published 2 books. I'd published a book of poetry. We'd published a coloring book. We'd made Hog Swallow. We'd made games that had sold well, gone out of print. We couldn't afford to reprint them because we had no clue what we were doing.
Hmm.
And so this 200-word role-playing game challenge comes along. I said, well, I'm going to try my hand at this. Um, I didn't win. So nobody hold your breath. I didn't win.
Well,
But
but
I,
they're all the submissions are on the internet. Like that's
right,
how the contest works.
right.
I'm gonna go search it up.
Well, and it was Purgatory House was the
Ah.
game I submitted, and the idea that in 200 words, your mechanics need to be as simple and as short as you can make them. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on mechanics because I really wanted to spend the bulk of my words describing the story of the game, right? Which is you're trapped inside a haunted house and it's trying to kill you and you're trying to make it out alive. And I'm like, well, what's the quickest, easiest mechanic I can think of? Oh, well, that now I know is you roll a d6 and a 1 to 3 is a failure, right? But at the time, I still, I was like blackjack. Everybody knows how to play blackjack. If they don't know how to play blackjack, it's the second easiest card game ever created.
After like war.
After war, right? A second easiest legitimate card game ever created. I would say it's actually a little bit easier than Go Fish. Like the strategy behind Go Fish gets really deep. But blackjack, it's you got the cards in front of you, or do you take another card or you don't. So I
Uh-huh.
said you're gonna play blackjack every time you encounter something that can kill you. Play a hand of blackjack against the person running the game. If you bust, you take damage. Bust 3 times and you're dead. So I spent like 25 words on explaining the mechanics of this game. Didn't win, but my Tuesday night gaming group was like, well, we want to play it. We want to try it out. You wrote it. Let us play it. And they loved it. And my friend Jim was like, Robert, there's a game here.
Yeah.
There's legitimately a game here. And I was like, yeah, but I mean, I need more than 200 words. He's like, okay, you write more than 200 words. Just
Right, right.
make the game and put it on Kickstarter. And just like you did with all your books, everything else. And if it makes money, great. If it doesn't, what have you lost, right?
Right.
Um, in this day and age, you've lost a lot if you go to Kickstarter and you don't fund. But back then, it was like, okay, all right,
Right. The
we'll give it a try.
expectations of how much pre
Mm-hmm.
Kickstarter used to really be like a pitch. Like you're just
It
like, hey, I
was. It
want to
was
do
an
this thing.
idea. Yeah,
And if people gave you money, then you used the money
you
to
did
do
the
the
thing.
idea.
Yeah.
Now it's like I've already invested all of this time and effort in making this thing, and it looks like this, and you can
Yep.
have it too. It's more
Yep.
like it's yeah. You every once in a while, you see a Kickstarter, which is more of a pie in the sky idea pitch,
Right.
and sometimes they fund and sometimes they don't. But like it's
Sometimes they
definitely
fund, sometimes they don't. I think we've all been burned enough. I know I have
mm,
um, on those pie in the sky ideas that as a consumer, it's much easier to back something and part with my money if it looks legitimate.
right,
Like if it
right.
looks like they know what they're doing. And me having done it like
Yeah,
many times.
you're informed consumer in
Right,
that
I'm an
sense.
informed consumer. But so that was Purgatory House, and I made it. I fleshed it out. It became a full-fledged game. That was my first role-playing game, and I'm pretty sure that was 2017. I'm gonna look real quick. Oh, you know what? That's the problem with blurring my camera.
Yeah,
You can't see the covers.
to like put
Um,
it well, yeah. Uh,
uh,
but it's got like it's a skull on the cover, black cover, got a skull on it.
mhm.
Is it got like this the suits or the eye? Am I misremembering? Is like the spade one
You're
of the eye
slightly
sockets?
misremembering. It's a skull in a spade, and
Oh,
there's
okay.
a
The
haunted
spade is
house behind it, and it just says in block letters, very gothic looking letters, Purgatory House, a pick up and play haunted house role playing game. And I mean that
so
that launched everything right
right.
there for real. I mean,
So this is how when you delivered the book is when I became aware of you because my business partner and friend and brother-in-law Brandon backed
yep,
it. And
yep.
so he may have actually bought it from you at a con later than that. I don't know. But anyway, Purgatory House was one of the books that it was like here it is, Matt. It's a book that somebody else did, and so I'm like, oh, Robert Turk, okay. And because he knew about it from that point, right? And so 2017, if that's when it came out, because that's when our first book came out as well as Wet Ink Games, we
Yes.
were releasing it in 2017. So we were,
Oh, was I know we're supposed to be talking about me, but was that the thing about animals
yeah,
fighting in a
yeah.
war? Yes. Okay, because I got that. Like we traded at a convention at that first
Ah,
convention Purgatory House was out. It was a convention called Imaginarium.
mm.
And I was there as still more a traditional author than a role-playing game
Right.
publisher.
The only reason you should go to Imaginarium is as a traditional author. Do not go as a vendor trying to sell
Mm-mm.
your books.
No, don't. You should. It's a good networking convention
Right.
for authors, like
Hmm.
authors. And I don't mean to say this in a disparaging way. If you're an amateur author, you will get more out of it than a professional author will. So it's very much you're going to go and like professional authors get to network and shake hands and meet each other and say, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. But usually, a professional author already has their editor in place. They've got a publisher in place.
Right.
It's really a networking convention, a learning convention for people that haven't taken that step. Yeah, and for that, it's a great thing. And I had a blast. I sold well for that convention. Um, but that's how I met Brandon, and we
Yeah.
traded books. I was probably performing as Gandersnitch the Goblin that weekend still, um, because I made games for quite a while before retiring from Gandersnitch. Um, so
Yeah.
Purgatory House, that was the first one, and in my mind, it was a hit. Um,
Indie
Steve,
darling, perhaps.
an indie darling. I mean, it
I, I mean, you've put it in. I mean, I've seen it at Studio 2 at
yeah,
various cons and stuff like that. You can still get it out there.
you can. There's still a few copies out there.
Yeah.
Um, there, I
Well,
think
not
we're
you. You don't need one. It's your game, but like
I don't
them.
have any. Like people ask me, I've
Mm,
got I've got my kids probably have a copy. I have an archived copy right here next to my desk. I keep a copy of all my games right next to my desk so that when somebody asks me on Discord or Facebook or something, hey,
yeah.
how do I play this specific rule? I have no freaking clue. I got to go to the book and look it up.
Sure, sure.
So
I wrote that in 2016.
I've
That's a
I've
ways ago.
written 9 or 10 other games since then, like and multiple versions of all those games, right? And playtesting and
Right,
stuff.
right.
So
And I think I mean I don't know. I love this sort of thing because it kind of continues, right? You're talking about like, okay, at that point when my first real, quote unquote, real RPG came out, I was still performing as a goblin, and then
right,
I was also publishing books of stories as the goblin, and then I wrote this first role-playing game, and then like the performance side has dropped off, like that same model that I'm talking about like you're always doing
the
like 4 or 5 things, but
the
one
old thing
comes in
drops
and the
off. Yeah, yeah.
other things comes out. And so you just said like 8 or 9 games since then. We could put a link to your website in the show notes for the show. People can go check out all of your games, but Weird Scouts and Starship Infernum and Goblonia is maybe
I yes,
your
I
biggest
finally
game.
made that was the
Yeah.
game I set out to make at the beginning, and I knew like before I did the 200 word role playing game contest, anything, I wanted to make the Ganderson Goblin role playing game. That seemed to be the next natural iteration of the character in his books and the performance thing I was doing. But I knew at the time I didn't have the knowledge, I didn't have the experience to
Mm,
make it well. I still have flyers from um, Gen Con 2017. Like Purgatory House came out. That one was doing well. I'm like, I'll make the Gablonia. I have flyers that have Starship Infernum on one side, which was the game that was coming out the next year after Purgatory House, and Gablonia on the other side, saying coming in whatever year, like 2018. Um, it didn't.
right.
Because I realized as I went on making games, like that was the one I wanted to make, and I kept pushing it to the side because I'm like, I'm not ready yet. I'm not there yet. Um, until the pandemic hit, and then it was one of my friends said, "Well, what else are you gonna do?"
Right.
Uh, So we did it. We play tested it for 2 years of lockdown
Yeah.
and banged
And
it into shape.
I don't remember now because I mean, I guess not that this is like serious journalism, but like I contributed a small amount of material to one of the
You
Goblonia extras.
did.
I was a stretch goal writer for Goblonia. So like I saw it in some of the early stages and was I think I play tested it one time in its one of its early iterations. So like I was involved in Goblonia in 2020 uh, through that process. You know, I remember sitting in my yard with no place to go, reading the your one of your betas or whatever, you
Right,
know,
right.
like
Probably on
you know,
Google Docs, or I might have
yeah,
sent you a
exactly,
PDF,
exactly,
like
exactly.
no formatting. Um,
Right.
and
Uh, but I was going somewhere with that, but like the oh, but I don't remember. So like I know at one stage you had a lot of like fiction segment. There was like a like Gandersnatch was introducing the book, right? And there's like, but like, did that actually make it to the final version? So
no,
it's like it that's the start of it, but then it sort of didn't fit by the time you got to the end of it or whatever, you know, it's like it's so you're saying it's like you wanted to make the Gandersnatch game, but then like by the time you did it, it wasn't he's not even in it.
he's not in it. He's not in it. None of the characters. One character from his stories is in it. Titania, the Queen of the Fairies,
Mm,
is in it, who is kind of Gandalf the Goblin's foil in the
mm,
fiction. They butt heads constantly in the fiction that I wrote. And as we're making the game, I realized um, the story I wanted to tell was bigger than that. It was about
mm,
his city, the city he came from. And he was a banished goblin. Like he didn't live there anymore. Um, and the more we focused in on the city, the tighter the game got, the more it differentiated itself from, say, playing silly Dungeons and Dragons where everybody's a crazy goblin, right? It really became a story about this city and the city struggles, and the inhabitants, the lowest rung of the inhabitants of that city. And that's where the fun was. And I realized that while Gandersnitch was an interesting narrator to the game, it also made it feel like you needed to know Gandersnitch to
mm.
enjoy this game. And you don't, you didn't. So I pulled him out. There are still people that know Gandersnitch, people that have read the fiction can still see like some what do they call those? Um, uh,
Palimpsest.
uh yeah, Easter eggs is what I was
Oh,
trying to
Easter
think
egg.
of.
Okay.
Easter eggs, right? They'll see some connections like, oh yeah, right, these connect, but they're not the same thing. You don't need one to enjoy the other. um
Which is
so
probably, you know, the smarter business decision or
right.
whatever. But also like I like here it's like the right creative decision, right? Where it's like if that was and this is like there's like two big we've talked for I made you tell the long version anyway here, Robert. We've been
Yep.
talking for a
Uh-oh.
while. But but I so there's two places that I want to go next, and they both kind of relate to what I'm just saying is that like you're a a veteran playtester. You playtest a lot, and so like you
Yes.
having to you can know when you release the game that like oh people were bouncing off of Anderson as the narrator, so I'm going to take that part out,
Yeah,
and you know it worked better that way, and then you move forward with the final version, and like because you play test a lot and like
I do.
you mentioned at the beginning that you know or maybe we didn't but like we can talk about it in a little bit but like I'm in one of your games right now like
Right.
2 days ago we were playtesting one of your upcoming games
Yeah,
because you're playtesting stuff a lot constantly um and the other thing that this makes me think about like the success of Goblonia and the like the things is like kind of the we've been talking about this like adding the stuff that's working, taking out the stuff of your like whatever, like your job queue. Your if you imagine your like offerings right as a creative, right? Here's the stuff that I'm doing now because this is the stuff that's working for me, and you're always
right.
willing to change it out. Like it's those are kind of the same mentality, I think, in some ways. Like and they're
Yes.
very directly related, but obviously one interfaces within the world of game design, and the other is like how you as a creative person interface with the rest of the world. So like
Right.
I
Yeah.
guess I've kind of talked into like there's only one question I'm asking here, but like I don't know, just is you want to focus on smaller first and talk about playtesting, or do you want to go right for the like your willingness to kind of trade up what you're doing I don't know that, does it come all the way back from like theater kid stuff, or is it just like I'm a businessman here, and so like I got to do what the
Yeah.
market will bear, you know?
Okay. Well, I don't actually like my business acumen is not the strongest. I will say my second game I released too early because I listened to advice from a distributor that I needed something new every 6 months, and I said, well, I can't
Mm,
do something new every 6 months, so I pushed to get it done 9 months, which meant that from a business standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, I didn't let Purgatory House ride its wave as a hit,
mm,
right? It could have gone longer, and it did. It probably rode its whole wave, but the game that came after it got eclipsed because it came out too soon after it. For me, for a small publisher, for a big publisher, yes, you got to release something every 6 months um, to keep your people
because they
employed,
got
to
all
keep
those
the
people on staff.
right, right. But I have the freedom to take my time. I also have the freedom to, and I think this more comes from being a storyteller and
Mm,
thinking about the story and the experience, which I guess probably goes all the way back to theater. Um, I have the I have the mindset, I have the freedom, I have the time to say this doesn't work. We're gonna put it away, or we're going to go in a different direction. In Gablonia, we were originally my very first idea for Gablonia when we started playtesting it before the pandemic was that it would be a Blades in the Dark hack.
mm.
Because I really loved Blades in the Dark. It had some of the same feel that I wanted.
Yeah,
I was
trapped in the
writing,
city,
yeah,
up against the
yeah,
odds, that kind of stuff.
it didn't work. Like you can see as you play Gablonia that there are some callbacks to that. There's some influence from that, but it's not a Blades in the Dark hack because the Blades in the Dark system didn't work for the story I wanted to tell. That's why it got shelved originally. It's like, this isn't working. It goes on the shelf, even though it's the project I really want to make. I poured my heart into it. It's not right. So I put it away and I worked on something else. Um, I am very much, and I will tell other people this, both in life and in business, um, sunk costs
Mm,
of time and effort and money ultimately don't matter. Like all the things you've done beforehand, all the time I had put into Gablonia, I have art that I have paid for games that game will never get published because it didn't end up being right. A lot of a lot of choices that humans make are driven by this idea of, well, I've done all of this work already, or I've spent all of this time, or I've spent this money on it. I have to see it through to the end. And my philosophy is, no, you don't. Like, you can stop at any point. What's done is done. What's spent is spent. You don't have to spend more. You don't have to dig your hole deeper, right?
mm.
That's not how you get out. You don't keep digging, right? You climb out of the hole and you walk away sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my business philosophy. And it ties into the art philosophy and everything else. I am totally willing to cut with a hatchet if I have to cut stuff. They say kill your darlings.
Hmm.
I've killed them all. They're all dead. And I will tell collaborators, playtesters, anybody that's working on a book, nothing is set until that file goes to the printer,
Yeah.
right? I mean, anything up until that point can change. It would be really dumb of me to change a lot of things at that point. But that is why I playtest. I go to playtesting earlier, I think, that a lot of designers go. Um, and it's
Oh, and
not
and I think you
to
play test longer.
I do play test longer. And somebody once told me, they told me on Hogswallow, actually, make sure you play test your game for a year. And I didn't. Um, and I found flaws, assumptions that I made that ended up to not be true um, after the game was released. And so I took that to heart. Like, okay, there was my lessons. Hogswallow was a great game. It sold out, right? I mean, that's
Right.
that's the sign right
That's
there. But I learned something from it of, if I had play tested this with more people, if I had done it differently, um, then that assumption I had made, there's a whole version of the game on the rule sheet nobody should ever play because it doesn't work, right? It was assumptions based on the other ones, but it had never been play tested.
Hmm.
And it doesn't really work. It's not fun. And for me, a game has to be fun, or it doesn't work. So I kind of went in a circle there, but
No, I like it. I think that's a leading, design philosophy, and I think there's a I don't know, there's a whole like I don't know, like don't let the perfect be the enemy of complete, or like
right.
there's a thing there. But but I think that features into the I mean there's so many you've said so many good things. I want to respond to it all
I
simultaneously.
do want to respond to that one though,
Yeah, yeah.
because as a traditional author as well, I say that I haven't actually traditionally published anything in a while now, since before the pandemic. But I also talk to a lot of authors, not
Hmm.
necessarily just game designers, and I get a lot of um, I'm going to say future game designers coming up to the table at a convention or something, asking questions, and I'm always willing to talk. I like I tell people, I don't have trade secrets. Um,
Right.
if I did, I would never have told anybody about Kaylin at Jostens, right? But I don't have trade secrets. I want people to be successful. I want to share what I know because people shared what they knew with me, or else, I mean, that's how we learn, right?
Right.
So that is one thing that I stress to authors, to game designers. You don't have anything until you've written it down, right? It can be in your head all you want. You can be doing world building for years, but until you've told the story, until you've written it down, until you have that first draft on paper or on digital paper, you don't have anything yet. You have an
Yeah.
idea.
Hmm.
So I am very much a proponent of right until you get to the end, right? And then put it out there. Like, even though the ending of the playtest we're doing right now is nebulous, it's more of an idea. There are actually mechanics there. They're ultimately not going to be the ones that stay. But I wrote the game from
Right.
beginning to end as bones, which is how I write a fiction story. You put the bones in, and then the second pass you put some muscle and some organs on it,
Yeah, yeah,
and then so
yeah.
you're building up layer by layer until finally you've got it dressed all fancy in layout and art, and it's ready to go off into the world.
Yeah.
Um,
So you mentioned art just now. So like how late for you does that side of it come in? Because I'm always impressed when I meet a game designer who's taught themselves like they're one person shop, and so they've taught themselves layout and they're doing that. And like I talked to a guy that he was writing the game into layout, like he was composing it in the
whew,
like layout
yeah,
program and stuff like that because he knew
right,
exactly how big he wanted it to be, and like
right.
so like I'm just going to write it in layout. And so obviously those are skills that I could spend the time to learn if I really wanted to, but like you've already done it, right? So did that come from like your because you were doing books before? Is
That
that
came from books. That came
yeah.
from self-publishing books and not being able to afford for self-published fiction, for small press indie publisher fiction, affording a layout person is kind of outside the realm for most people. It was for me
and
at the
it
time, so I learned how to do it.
and then you've carried that on, so then like what point do you start thinking of art and layout and sort of the final product? Like, are you always kind of like, is that
Yeah.
like, is there's like I don't know if you're a Tolkien fan, but like in Tolkien, there's the song of the song of the Ainu, and they sing the world and they know what it's going to look like, and then they later have to create it to like match the original vision. So like, do you have those moments you're like, when this game is done, it will look like this, it will have these features and stuff like, and then but set that aside now, and now we got to start with the first draft and all that kind of stuff. Or is it
Um,
like you don't know what it's going to look like until you've written the game, and then you start casting the artist and the feel? Like, I mean, I'm sure different projects have different
right.
processes, but like because you're going to do so much of it, when do you start thinking about the different parts?
Right.
Like the
I am not an illustrator. Okay. So my wife does beautiful art as costume rendering, so she has illustrated some stuff. I personally am not an illustrator. I have a designer's eye. I have an artistic eye from being in theater and making stuffed animals and sculpted leather masks. I can paint like things. I can paint objects, I can sculpt objects, but I can't illustrate. So I do not do any of the art. I do the design for the covers, and I do the interior design. The design for the cover, I'm gonna go in out of order here. That I
Yeah,
always have a cover design before we go to Kickstarter,
sure.
because you gotta show people what you've got, right?
Right,
I
right.
don't
That's
have
part
all
of
the
that pitch
yeah,
of like,
I
this is
don't
what it's
have
going to look like.
right. I don't have all the interior art done at that point, but I have pieces that are like touchstones. Layout is last. Like that comes after everything's written, and it's like I might have an idea. Like for the book I just released, just came out. Actually, it's not even released until June. It showed it. We got it done 3 months early. Uh, Knock on wood, that never happens. But so I had this idea that I wanted it to. I knew it had to be passed around the table, because it's called Our Woodland Gods. It's a GM-less guided storytelling experience, kind of like a choose your own adventure book, but with rules and mechanics. And I knew you had to pass the book around the table. I kind of wanted in the early phases for it to feel like a Bible, and I
Mm,
realized that was a bad choice marketing wise, that people were going to take offense at that. But I did make it that size, like because that's an easy book to hold, right?
be a
And
prayer
and
book
it's
instead.
yeah, we went in a totally different direction.
Yeah, yeah.
But art illustration actually comes in really early for me. I because I'm inspired by the art and the imagery. So I'll have artists start working on stuff before I've finished playtesting and my part of the game, um, which I think only once or twice has that led to, oh, some things have changed in this illustration that I paid for, that I now have,
Mhm.
doesn't work anymore. That's okay. It's a nice illustration. The artist got paid for it. Newspapers do it all the time, right? Magazines do it. They pay for something and bury it. We've got some stuff that, I mean, the artists can show it, but it won't ever end up in a printed book. But so the art comes early because that helps inspire me, helps keep me going, and sometimes helps focus my ideas like into a visual look. Um, there's the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words
Yeah,
or
yeah.
more. Um, Being able to show people an illustration of the characters or the world, especially in play testing, right?
Mm.
Helps them immediately or very quickly get on the same page as me, what I have in my head that maybe I haven't written down on the page yet. Like, so art comes early, layout comes last. And Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I just was curious
Okay.
about like because you mentioned the art. Like when do you start visualizing the final product? And so
Yeah.
like the final product comes later, but like the art being part of the inspiration is, I mean, I certainly understand that. That's like
Yeah.
half, not half, but like a bunch of the games that Wet Ink has published are like, this is a cool piece of art. Let's write a game
Right.
around that,
Right.
like,
Um,
so I definitely understand that process.
like I have the cover, like it's paid for, it's done for Veil of the Failed and the Fallen, the game that you're playtesting right now.
Right.
And are we going to Kickstart at the end of the summer on that? I don't know.
I don't know.
But the cover's done.
The
Like
cover's done.
that's what it's gonna look like.
Well, since you just mentioned it, why
Yeah.
don't we kind of move into sort of a uh what are you working on now kind of portion of this? What's your newest thing? What can people, and heading towards a where can people find you on the internet? But first off, tell us more about like your current project.
Yeah. So we just got our Woodland Gods in. And that was a panic to get it in under the deadline. I don't know if you've talked about this on your show before, but I going all the way back to making the stuffed animals in the United States, I really try to have as much of what we produce made in the United States. So our printer is actually Jostens Yearbook Company, who most people know because they probably made your yearbook in high school,
Yeah.
right? And to keep their people employed full time, like around the year, they have a commercial printing side. printed in the United States, and I really like working with them. The one downside is they print yearbooks, like that's
Yeah.
their primary business. So there is a blocked out window of about 3 months in the spring where they don't print anything but yearbooks. And I think last year, not like last year, the last time I did a book through them, that would have been Gablonia probably. The I call it the drop dead date was February 15th. Like I had to have final files signed on approval and everything in their hands so they could start rolling on February 15th. Um, there were still paper issues and stuff, so we didn't actually get the books until July that year. But I had that in my head, like February 15th is the drop dead date. And I emailed Kaylin and she's like, actually, it's July 28th. And I'm like, oh. So we crammed four
January
weeks of
28th,
work.
probably,
January,
right?
I'm sorry, January 28th. We crammed 4 weeks of work into 2 weeks. Like I messaged the editor and I'm like, I know you like to take your time. We don't have time,
Uh-huh.
right? If we hit this deadline, great. I want to hit the deadline because I hate delivering a Kickstarter late, even though that's like a given. That's normal.
It's
Um,
yeah, it's
I
difficult.
I feel bad. I want to meet my obligations. People give me money. I want them to have the
Right.
book
Sure.
when I said they'll have the book. So yeah, so I had the illustrator. I realized in layout we were 3 illustrations short for what I needed. And so I called Melissa Robb and I was like, hey, how quickly can you turn around 3 more illustrations? I know exactly what I want. And I told her exactly what I wanted. To an extent, like I know people in the comic book, if they're in the comic book industry, their art sheet gives them ultra specifics usually. I'm not that specific. It was like I need a cultist fishing and maybe give him a pile of treasure and a pile of junk beside him in a big tree.
Yeah,
So that was like
that's
that's
plenty to
how
go on, I
specific.
think.
Right. That was how specific I was. And she was like, how does 3 days sound? And I was like, oh, okay, you can have a week. um, so she took a week and got the art in. And so we made the deadline, which ultimately meant we got the book 3 months earlier than I was expecting. So that book is out. It's still going through shipping for international customers. And it'll come to retail stores in after probably June or July. Um, so after Origins, before Gen Con is what it sounds like. The next thing that Matt is on a Monday night playtest for is called Veil of the Failed and the Fallen. It is a I had this idea, and part of it's because I write middle grade fiction stories, like adventure stories where kids are the heroes. I had this idea, and I have a lot of friends in my generation talk about former gifted kid syndrome,
Hmm.
where it was like, oh, you're gonna do great things, and you got all this talent, you got all this intelligence, and I'm sure some of us did great things. um, but you know, you're gonna be doctors and lawyers and engineers, and you're gonna go to the moon and all this stuff. And I mean, I feel successful. I'm writing role playing games. Like high school me, if I had told high school me, hey, you're gonna have a career writing role playing games, they would have said, no, you're crazy. But they probably would have liked that. They thought they were gonna be a fighter pilot. So
All right.
big departure there, or a
Yeah.
doctor, a fighter pilot or a doctor, right?
Yeah. I mean, those two are so similar anyway.
Right. Um, so the next I started thinking about this idea. What about the kids that don't save the world?
Hmm.
Like what you like and it's my former gifted kid syndrome game. It's kids were taken from Earth to save a magical realm and given these awesome gifts and had this fantastic adventure, and they fail. They do not save the realm. And I started thinking of like, what kind of damage would that do to a kid? What kind of weight would that put on them? And how do you tell that story? And I thought for a while it was going to be a novel. Um, and then I was like, yeah, but I'm making games right now and I have fun making games because that's a back and forth, that's a conversation. Even the
Hmm.
design process is a conversation. Where writing a book, it's a conversation that happens in my head, but it's really only me having the conversation. Um,
You're like talking to yesterday's Robert when you edit today's work, or
Right,
when you edit
right,
yesterday's
yeah.
work today, and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, talking to the characters and all of that,
Mm.
or letting them talk to me and listening. But so I started making it as a game, and it's you failed to save the realm as kids, and as adults you get a second chance. And how is the story different as adults now approaching saving this magical world? And it's I would say even though I've made horror games like two horror games where the goal is everybody dies in those games. And our Woodland Gods, which is cozy cultist horror, it's like cozy stuff mixed with eldritch horror and back and forth. I would
Right.
say this is probably the deepest, potentially darkest game I have made. We're finding in playtesting that it's a little bit lighter than I had imagined going into it, and I'm okay with that. Like I'm letting the story be the story that it wants to. That what comes out is what comes out, and
Right.
but so th
It's sort of like, I mean, this is sort of like, I don't know if we want to, maybe we have to cut this out later, but this is like it's like you set up the characters, right? It's like, okay, your life hasn't worked out like you
right,
wanted it to as an adult. Is sort of like a set of the character creation process. But then you get put in the magical world, and then there's like, frog people and
right,
magic spirits and shadow beast in the forest and all that kind of stuff. And then it's like, it's just you, that transposition, if it was like a, I mean, this is like way, the failure to launch as an adult
right.
is sort of made irrelevant by the fact that you're now back in the world. And so like
You're getting a
you're
second
getting the second chance.
chance.
So
You're
it's like
getting a
ends
second
up being
chance.
sort of like aspirational and hopeful and like
Right,
all those sort of things. But it does start from this sort of assumed dark place. But the
right.
darkness, I don't know. Again, we're playtesting it right now. Like the
We're
balance is
playtesting. We're
sort of
finding
balanced.
that.
Like,
Yeah, yeah.
good things happen, bad things happen every session, and it's like, ooh, we did this great thing, but ooh, this terrible thing happened, because that's like
Right.
because
And
it's a PBTA game, so
you
like
you you missed while you were at Gamma the like I want there to be hard moral choices in it. Like that's the story that I want to tell, but I don't want to tell a depressing story.
right,
Because ultimately at the end of the day, I get playing a game should be fun. In my mind, playing a game should be fun. If I publish a game, if I put a game out there, I want people to have fun playing it. I want it to be a form of escapism. I don't want it.
mm,
It's not supposed to be therapy. It's not supposed to be, oh, let's dwell on all our failures and how dark and horrible the world is. You can watch the news and
yeah,
get that. Like you play games
it's
for,
yeah,
I play games for other reasons.
sure,
Um, and there are dark and depressing, very serious games out there. I don't play them. like
right,
I don't find those enjoyable. So that's not the kind of games that I make. So Veil of the Failed and the Fallen was, I thought, in the perfect timeline, which evidently Marvel broke it or something, was gonna go to Kickstarter in February, like this past February. It wasn't ready. Our Woodland Gods took over, and that's what ended up like all that work spilt over. But the cover was ready for February. Nothing else was, but the cover was ready for February. So yeah, so that is happening. And the goal right now is maybe to go to Kickstarter at the end of the summer. Um, there is another idea that has
mm,
jumped. It hasn't jumped in line yet, um, but the goal or the plan with Purgatory House and Starship Infernum was there would always be a third game in that series based on the blackjack system that
yeah,
I
yeah,
created for that. Um, and nothing ever quite stuck. Like at one point, it was going to be a dark dungeon crawl, and then Mork Borg came out, and it's like, okay, there's other games doing that. Like that's what most role playing games are, right? Is that dark dungeon crawl? And I'm like, yeah, a dungeon crawl where everybody dies. We've got that covered in video games and other stuff, and that wasn't very fun. It was at one point going to be a post-apocalyptic road trip game. Um,
right.
and
Fewer of
there's
those.
fewer of those, right? Um, and that didn't quite work. And then my booth assistant last weekend at Lexington Comic Con was like, hey, when's the what are you doing for the third one? Like that was always in the plan when Starship Infernum came out. Just because I like things in threes, it feels
Yes.
incomplete to me if there's not a third one. Even if the third one's not any good as far as movies go. Role-playing games, I want the third one to be good, right? Books, I want the third one to be good. Movies, yeah, the third one doesn't have to be. It just finish it, right? There is going to be a third one. We talked about ideas. He is an archaeologist,
All right.
and he gave me an idea of. Um, I'll just go ahead and say it. We don't have to cut it out. Well, we don't know the title yet. Playing around with Murder Island as the title.
All right. All right. Kind of tells you
But
what it's right there in the title.
it's right there in the title. It's Murder Island that you are trying to escape an island where everything is trying to kill you. Um, so yeah, I mean, Starship Infernum was you are on a doomed starship having to work together before time runs out and everybody dies. Purgatory House was you're trapped in this evil haunted house that wants to kill you. So yeah, Murder Island, Death Island. I think Death Island is already a thing though.
Might be.
Yeah, I couldn't find anything with the title Murder Island, so I'm claiming it right now.
Sure.
Um,
There you go.
uh,
Uh, you know,
Timestamp
copyright.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
here it is.
But that's the
It's
idea for that.
yeah.
And the good thing is the mechanics are mostly done. Like,
Right. It would I imagine it would be relatively easy to make because you've made two of them already. So it's just like you just
right,
change the theme stuff and
change
like
the theme, tweak some things that I didn't like ultimately about Starship Infernum or Purgatory House, like choices that were made in those that don't quite fit for because this one would be a more modern, like modern day sort of scenario, kind of like the TV show Lost or Gilligan's Island, which I know wasn't murderous, but there's always a goofy way of playing it. So there'd be a Gilligan's Island goofy way in there.
somewhere
And,
between the two, right? The
yeah,
is
and
it
like so, but that's the whole setup of these games is I give you the rules, right? The how to play blackjack in a role-playing game that is, and then it's a survival horror game. So the game's trying to kill you. But there's all these different ways you can play. There's all these different scenarios or lenses you can slot in. So like for Starship Infernum, we had the classic Aliens movie where a giant alien is trying to kill you. We had Event Horizon where you're in another dimension full of hell beasts or whatever, and we had classic Star Trek, and we had one that was the Prison Break episode from Battlestar Galactica. So all these different ways you can approach the game to play with that rule set and that theme, so that it'll have all those. Somewhere there's a list, but it's not in front of me right now. So
right.
that's going to happen. It may go to Kickstarter before Veil, simply because it has less work that needs to be done,
Right.
writing wise. The flip side of that is I actually hate the kind of writing that the book requires. Because the second half of the book is all, in this series, is all descriptions that if you don't know what something looks like, if you don't know what should happen, like what should happen if the group falls into a pit of sharpened spikes, right? And it gives you text to just read aloud so that even new GMs
Hmm. They
that are
have all that
trying,
text.
they
Yeah.
have all that text so they can just read it aloud and the game keeps rolling because it's a style of game that it's got to keep rolling or else the tension falls apart. Like there's a tension built into blackjack and raising is poker, but taking a hit, right? Which is actually blackjack. That we're not talking about other things here. And yeah, so that there's a kind of tension that the game needs to keep rolling. And if you have to slow down and really think, oh, I don't know, and if you have somebody that's not a theater person their entire
Oh
life
yeah,
like
yeah. I mean,
me, that
I really appreciate that because like it's kind of like where going all the way back to playing Purgatory House at like, as a 200 word RPG or whatever. Like you're like we're here role playing. We know if I could just say like, oh, the group falls into a pit of spikes. Like great, I can describe that right now. But
right,
like making it like almost like a not a simulator, but like a instruction manual for like how to play these kind of games because you know how to
right.
play blackjack already, and then here's the descriptions for you that you can read, and
Yep.
then I don't know, I like that as a describing how to do it. And
But I
yeah.
hate writing it. I despise writing it. I really, really do. I call it slog writing.
Mm,
Same thing when I'm hired to write NPCs for a game or monsters for a bigger game. I'll do it because there's a paycheck at the end of it,
sure.
but it's like pulling teeth. I just I don't like. There was a game I had to write like uh, a description of a wolf, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. Everybody knows what a freaking wolf
It
looks like,
looks
and
like
I'm having to make this wolf interesting, right?
right, right.
In 50 words or whatever, and it's like it's a wolf, right? If this is your first encounter with a wolf, we got issues. Um,
Then popular culture has failed you.
right.
Um,
So
uh,
I got one more thing. You want me to tell you about
yep,
the other thing that's coming out?
sure, sure.
Because
Go ahead.
this is something that I have promised for a while and hinted at for a while, and it has gelled conceptually. There are no words on paper yet. Like for Murder Island, there are actually words on paper. There are no words on
It
paper
says
for
Murder
this one yet.
Island, and that's all it says. But it's on
It's got
paper.
some other stuff. But it's definitely under 200 words at this point. So Gablonia was, in my mind, a success. Um, it's still selling decently well. We're selling through our copies, and I always wanted to do Gablonia 2, not a second edition of the game. At one point, I was thinking, oh, it'll be a standalone game, kind of like White Wolf used to do with their standalone supplements, or Fantasy Flight does with like the Star Wars stuff. It was going to be another take on it. It was going to be pirate goblins. And it was going to be pirate goblins sailing around to mysterious islands. And because I wanted them to have a cool pirate ship, I really wanted them to be able to sail around on the carcass of a leviathan. Like that's where it started working. Like they were gonna build this ship out of bones and dead fish, right?
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
was going to be
That's
their
very
goblin
goblin-y.
ship, right? That actually came about because of an incident that happened while me and my friends were playing Sea of Thieves. Where if your boat at that time, there was a glitch, if your ship got hit by a shark, like one of the big megalodon sharks, it would fly through the air, right? And you're like, it broke the physics in the game somehow. So there's just ships flying through the air and sharks flying through the air, and the only solution at that point was to log out and log back in and start over, and you lost everything. But somehow that got me thinking of, well, what if the ship was the shark, and you're on the shark, and that then devolved into how to make it goblin-y. So um, I have decided it's not going to be a standalone game. It's going to be an expansion to Gablonia. So it's not going to invalidate the core book. You will still probably need the core book. You're gonna need the core
Yeah,
book,
yeah.
right, to play it. But it's going to be beyond Gablonia. It's going to be how to take the game
Mm,
outside of the city and not just make it Dungeons and Dragons. So it is going to have the pirates. You can be a crew of pirates sailing and finding these, and so there'll be a third or a fourth of the book dedicated to doing that. Um, it's going to be Gablonian space,
right, right. Space
space goblins.
hackers, space goblins, like
So
salvage crew, like
right, going to
cutting
the
up
moon.
cutting
You're
up
going,
other
yeah,
leftover hulks of spaceships, and
yeah,
you know
um,
accidentally welding your friend's helmet to the ship, and
right,
all goblin stuff.
goblin stuff. And there's a third one, but now that I've talked about everything else, I don't even remember what the third one was.
Well, I mean, you
Um,
could just put goblins in anything, the
goblins in anything,
post-apocalypse, or
right?
like they're library people that like got
Right.
to keep they're the
So
janitorial staff of a university. Like, I mean, there's a lot of like a magical university, right? So like,
right. Oh, I do like the Magical University. I'm stealing that idea.
yeah, have it. Um,
Uh, let's reclaim that imagery from J.K.
sure,
Rowling. Uh, yeah. So sorry, I'm writing a note,
yeah, write a note.
or I will forget it, and it's going to go on my wall of notes that I never look at behind my computer on a
But
post-it
it's
note.
there. but it's
It's
there.
there. Like looking at these post-it notes right now, I could tell you what fonts I used in Weird Scouts. Um, I could tell you there's a company called Perfection Press in Logan, Iowa. I'm
Hey,
guessing they print books, but I don't know.
probably I've heard of.
Probably.
I mean, they've that's a thing I've heard of. I think that's Tristan Zimmerman's tip.
Oh,
Uh,
that must be. Somebody said it. It seemed important. I wrote it down, and it goes on this bar above me where there's lots of post-it
yeah,
notes.
I think he got I believe that's where he got his limited edition fancy version of Shanty Hunters printed was at Perfection Press.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
So
I'll look into them. I'm happy with Jostens. Like I
sure,
I they have taken me through getting that first book made. And
right
now through
now
I've
through
done I've done 4 or 5 with them. Weird Scouts did not go through Jostens. It was during the pandemic, and we printed it in softback paperback.
yeah.
Um, and a big mistake. That was a business mistake I made. I learned I personally don't like printing role-playing games in paperback. I
No,
want a hardback book.
there you
Um,
go.
and I'm gonna pay for it. I know that. So yeah. So those are the next 3 things coming out.
That's
Yeah.
I mean that's amazing. Yeah, run them down once more time because we've been
But yeah, we were
same clip.
talking in circles.
Yeah,
Veil of the Failed and the Fallen, right? Gifted Kin Syndrome, magical kids come back as adults to have to save the world. It is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and it is staying as a Powered by the Apocalypse game. It's not like Gavlonia. Oh, that was a Blades in the Dark game, and now it's something new. It is going to be a Powered by the Apocalypse game when it's all said and done, which is kind of fun to play in somebody else's tool set and tweak it and make it your own. Gablonia, Beyond Gablonia, an expansion to Gablonia, and Murder Island.
Murder
Those are
Island.
those will be coming out over the next few years. Now, they might come out quicker because I know what everything's going to be. Gablonia is going to take time.
But but also like if it's going to take you at least 24 months to do these 3 books, how many more ideas will jump the line and like
Well,
that
that
kind
is
of
a
stuff.
thing.
Yeah.
There is a Google Doc somewhere in my Google Drive that has ideas, abandoned ideas.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So there was going to be an expansion to Weird Scouts called Dark Scouts. Um, I think at this point, the last little kid that was waiting on that is grown up and doesn't care. So he's at least in high school. If he watches this, I'm probably gonna get a phone call because his mom is one of my best friends from college. And
Uh, it,
I did tell the kid at dinner that I would make it just for him.
one
And
pager, do a
but
one pager.
I failed in my promise. Um, yeah, I mean, there were expansion ideas for Weird Scouts, like
Sure,
all sorts of stuff we were going to do that just did not materialize because of market and timing.
sure.
So
Market and timing. We could talk more about business
that's
some
its
other time.
own podcast
Yeah, yeah,
right there.
for sure, for sure. So we talked for a while, Robert. Thank you for your time today, but
Yeah,
we should wrap this up. And the last thing to do is to tell people where they could check out all the, we said a bunch of games. You've said that they're on drive through. Where else can you find them? Where else can people find you on the
sure.
internet if they want to hear more of your, yeah, tell us all the places.
Uh,
Where can people get your stuff?
right. You can find my publishing company, Wicked Clever, at wicked-clever.com. I know it's horrible. Put a dash in your website. I never learned. Somebody else actually had Wicked Clever with no dash. They were some sort of makeup company out west, and I was like, I'm doing it. So wicked-clever.com. You can find links to everything that I have created on there, except our coloring book. I don't think you can find links to that anymore. But links to everything. Drive-thru RPG, you can find my games on Drive-thru RPG. Most of my games are actually in distribution through Studio 2, which means you can get them at your local retail store. And people often ask, well, is it better if I buy it from you? No, it's better if you buy it from your local retail store and support them. I've been paid for that. And then I
Mm.
don't have to find a box and find the book in my house and box it up and ship it to you. And you don't have to pay shipping. You just go to your store, ask them to order it and get it. Now, if they don't want to carry it, if they're not going to get it for you, yes, go to my website. You can get it and I will sign it and I will ship it to you. I'm very happy to do that. Or you can see me at conventions. I'm going to be at Origins. We won't have a booth at Origins. I'm not going to be at Gen Con, but my games will be at Gen Con from Studio 2. Like we said earlier, I am going to be running games at Indie Games on Demand, and I think I'm going to kind of just put them all out there. I think you have to pick between two, so it might be like Purgatory House and Starship Infernum is a slate, and that'll be what runs for one session. And people pick, do you want to be Purgatory House? Do you want to be in space? And Gablonia will be on there. There's supposedly there might be a playtest
He's
version of Veil
oh.
at Origins. Like there's rumblings of that happening.
Rumblings.
Rumblings.
You're the rumbling. Like what?
No, it's not me.
Oh, somebody else
It's
is going to play test it.
yeah, it was on
That'd
the
be
IDGN Discord
oh,
comments about we
nice.
have access to a playtesting space and who can fill it. I can fill it. One session. I don't want to do more than one session there, but
Right.
yeah. So I think that's I mean, my list of cons I would like to go to, Gary Con, Gamehole Con, and PAX U are on a post-it note right above my desk. I've been told I have
Well,
to go to PAX U. So
Gary Con is like in days from when we're recording this, so you're probably
right.
not.
So that's gonna be next year. You just
Yeah.
missed it. It was a great time. I wish I'd seen you there. Um, and yeah, I don't know when Gamehole Con is. Somebody said go to it. So
It's in middle of October sometime.
oh, well, that one could maybe still happen. I don't know.
Early-ish October. I think it was like the 16th, 17th, 18th last year.
Yeah.
I told you to go. It's a great show. We can talk more about it, but I'm going to end
Yeah.
this recording here, Robert. Thank you again
Boom.
for
We're
your
done.
time. Thank you for sharing all your long story. You said you would do the short version, then I made you do the long version, and it was wonderful. And this has been fun. And I will look forward to talking to you again, in
Yeah.
person or online.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
thank you everyone for watching this video.